Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a clash of empires or a thunderclap of conquest, but with bark, plain, fibrous, and not particularly fashionable bark, and a forest so still you could almost hear it exhale. You arrive just before dawn in a small West African village, nestled at the edge of a thick forest. The air here smells like damp earth, tree sap, and wood smoke that someone forgot to put out properly. The kind of place where everything has texture, and you quickly learn your shoes were not made for this level of honesty from the ground. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. Is it midnight in Maputo? 3 a.m. in Porto Alegre? I love knowing where we're all gently drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the clearing, where the light is barely awake. Soft gold spills through the canopy like a secret, and in the center of it all, a group of elders sits in a semicircle, already at work. No one speaks, just the steady, patient sound of fingers tugging, shaping, pressing bark into form. One elder, his robe the color of old turmeric, nods at you without lifting his gaze from his work. His hands are wrapped in cloth, not for protection, but out of respect. You realize quickly that here, bark isn't just bark. It's skin, memory, and material with opinions. A young apprentice beckons you toward a pile of fresh bark sheets, laid out on a low rack to dry. You touch one. It's warm, not from the sun, but from being recently alive. It curls slightly under your fingertips, like it hasn't quite decided if it's ready to become something else. Birds chatter overhead, not in alarm, in commentary. You think you catch the phrase, "Ah, another visitor with soft hands." The villagers treat the process like slow music. Every move is deliberate. No one rushes. Even the fire that heats the bark oil crackles with a kind of mindfulness. You notice one of the statues near the center of the space. It's not carved from wood, like you might expect. It's layered, wrapped, built up like a memory. The face is shaped from softened bark and pressed with thumbprints. You lean closer and realize it's not symmetrical. And that's the point. This isn't about perfection, it's about truth. Historians still debate the origin of bark statuary. Some say it emerged from a shortage of workable timber. Others argue it evolved as part of a ritual tradition where the temporary nature of bark was essential to the meaning. Still others think it was about portability. Spirits, after all, sometimes like to travel light. The elder beside you hums softly as he presses a strip of bark onto the arm of a half-formed figure. It adheres like skin to skin. He doesn't look up. "It's lighter this way," he murmurs. You nod, though you're not sure what he means yet. He smiles faintly. Lighter doesn't mean weaker, just easier to carry, even by memory. You sit quietly, watching the hands around you build something out of softness, not chiseling, not forcing, just coaxing. And as the sun rises a little higher, you begin to understand. This story won't be loud. but it will stay with you. You follow the apprentice, barefoot, calm, and roughly 12 years old, toward a small hut just behind the central clearing. Its walls are made of woven reed and mud. Its roof thatched with dry palm fronds. It leans slightly to the left, like it's mid-thought. Inside, the smell changes. No longer smoke and sap, but something deeper. Warm earth, crushed leaves, and the faint trace of old sweat and old stories. This is the bark carver's workshop. You duck to enter. Inside, the light is soft, filtered through tiny holes in the walls. It feels like stepping into a shadow that remembers firelight. The apprentice nods for you to sit. You do, on a folded mat that is mostly functional and only slightly pokes you in the spine. In the corner, a low table rests beneath bundles of tools. Not sharp chisels, but bone scrapers, shells, and curved pieces of wood smoothed by time. There's also a cluster of small gourds filled with pigment, ochre, charcoal, and something green that smells suspiciously like fermented mint. The bark statues in this space aren't lined up like trophies. They're in various states of becoming. One figure rests on its side, its torso layered in strips like bandages, its face still a soft suggestion. Another stands upright, already painted in clay tones, but missing arms, as if waiting for the right emotion before choosing a gesture. You ask the apprentice, "Are these for display?" He tilts his head, confused. Display where? Exactly. Woman enters silently. Her robe is dark rust, tied with a palm fiber belt. Her hands are calloused and calm. Without a word, she picks up one of the half-finished statues and begins layering another piece of softened bark onto its chest. You ask how they know when it's done. She smiles, not at you, but at the figure. It stops needing me. You glance around and realize this room is more than a studio. It's a waiting room for memory, for story, for bark to decide what it's willing to become. One figure in particular draws your attention. It's smaller than the rest, childlike proportions, but the face is aged, wrinkled in folds of bark that curve like time itself. Its body is wrapped in 5 layers of differently colored bark, each labeled with a symbol carved into the base. The apprentice explains softly, "That one is for someone who lived 5 lives." You blink. They say, he adds, if bark is taken with gratitude, it remembers more than just shape. It remembers feelings. You reach out and trace one of the carved symbols. It hums beneath your finger. Historians still argue about this, whether bark was chosen for spiritual reasons or simply practicality. Was it used for ancestors because it decomposes gently, returning to the earth with grace, or because it was the only material allowed to be harvested without a weapon? You get the sense the villagers would answer, yes. The woman finishes her layering and steps back. The figure looks different now. Not complete, but calm. Less in progress, more in pause. She wraps a cloth gently around it and places it near the doorway, ready to be carried, not to a shrine, but to someone's home. You thank them with a bow. Not sure if that's the right gesture, but it feels sincere. As you step back into the light, the apprentice says, "The statue will last." as long as the memory is needed. Then he adds, with a mischievous grin, longer, if the termites are busy somewhere else. You laugh. So does he. And in that moment, bark becomes not just material, but a kind of humor, a kind of humility. You walk back to the clearing with the morning sun on your face and the scent of crushed bark in your clothes, and you think, this workshop isn't a place that makes things. It's a place that listens to them being made. The morning stretches into itself like a cat with nowhere to be. The sun filters lazily through the forest canopy, dappling the village paths with shifting light that looks like it belongs in a poem. You walk slowly, deliberately, as if the ground has asked you not to wake it too quickly. You end up near a shaded bench made of woven roots and river stones, where two elders are discussing something with the patience of people who've seen enough years to stop rushing through sentences. They're comparing strips of bark, one fibrous and dark, the other pale and soft. Neither speaks louder than necessary. Their conversation is more gesture than voice. You sit down beside them. One elder turns to you, holds up both strips, and asks a question you weren't prepared for. If you were a spirit, he says, which one would you wear? You blink, think, point to the softer one. He grins. So you'd want to be remembered as gentle, but not very durable. Touché. That's when the other elder leans over and taps the stiffer bark. This one, he says, holds form longer, but burns faster. You nod slowly, wondering how many decisions in this village come down to metaphors that double as design choices. They show you more. Some bark is chosen because it absorbs pigment like thirsty earth. Other kinds crack when it dries. And that cracking, it's on purpose, like wrinkles on a familiar face. It gives the statue a voice before it speaks. One figure nearby has thin bark strips layered into concentric swirls around the chest. The elder explains, this one is for someone whose stories always spiraled. You begin to understand that bark isn't just chosen, it's interpreted. It has personality, temperament, memory. Unlike wood, which can be carved deep and kept firm, bark is moody. It flexes, breathes. It might shift shape weeks after a statue is finished, and that, apparently, is part of the beauty. Historians love this point. Some argue that bark was a deliberate rejection of permanence, that the ancestors didn't want to be remembered in stone or iron, but in something that would fade the way stories do, gently, inconsistently, but with feeling. Others, of course, say bark was used simply because it was available, cheaper, easier to gather. You watch the elder peel a narrow strip from a cured bundle, holding it to the light. It's translucent in places, paper thin and trembling in the breeze. He presses it flat with a stone and hums a short phrase, something rhythmic, almost percussive. You ask if the bark always bends like that. No, he says, but it wants to today. That might be the most bark-like answer ever given. Then, in a moment that feels halfway between ceremony and shrug, he tears the strip in half. One piece goes into a pot of boiling resin, the other into a child's hands to become a toy bird. Nothing wasted, nothing glorified, just used with care. You leave the elders and make your way toward a drying rack where dozens of bark fragments hang like laundry, each one labeled with a symbol, each one waiting for its turn to become something else. You pass one that's been scorched lightly on the edge for shadows. A voice says, you turn. It's the same apprentice as before, now holding a small basket of bark chips and a slightly overripe mango. Some spirits, he says, only come when the statue remembers how to burn. You look back at the blackened edge, then at the forest beyond the village, and you realize this material was never about making something last. It was about making something true. You're led through a narrow trail that curves away from the village, beneath an arch of vines so thick it hums. The air here is cooler, denser, more deliberate. This is where the bark is gathered, not harvested, gathered. A word that matters here. You notice that everyone walks a little slower, even the apprentice, usually spring-loaded with energy, steps with careful reverence. You reach a wide clearing, ringed with tall trees, some as wide as doorways, their trunks ribbed and smooth, their roots like coiled rope. The light filters through their leaves in faint green and gold, making the whole place feel underwater. An elder steps forward, holding a curved blade, not for cutting, but for peeling. He touches the tree first, palm flat, whispering something in a language too old to be translated, but too honest to be misunderstood. You don't ask what he says. It feels private, not sacred exactly, just specific. He begins. With gentle pressure, he inserts the blade beneath the bark, not to gouge, but to slide. The bark peels back with a soft crackle, like parchment opening after a long rest. A narrow sheet is pulled free, no wider than his forearm, no longer than a loaf of bread. Then he steps back. You expect more bark, more stripping, more gathering, but that's it. One sheet per tree, per season. Historians still debate whether this method was symbolic, spiritual, or just sustainable. But the elder will tell you, a tree that gives without dying gives longer. You run your fingers along the exposed trunk. It's not raw, not bleeding, just altered. And already, a thin membrane has begun to form over the spot, a scar in progress. Nearby, several sheets of bark rest on a rock, weighted with small stones. They curl slightly at the edges, each one unique. Some pocked with bug marks, others veined like hands. A woman kneels beside them, brushing the surface with a mixture of ash and palm oil. She explains that this wakes up the bark, makes it remember it's been chosen. You sit with her a while, breeze stirs, lifting the corner of one sheet, and you wonder if bark, once removed, begins listening more carefully, like it wants to know who it will become. You help stack the sheets onto a carrying frame, thin wood struts tied with vines, and hoist it onto your back. It's heavier than you expect, not in weight, in presence, like carrying someone's story before it's written. As you return to the village, the trees behind you don't feel diminished. If anything, they seem taller, prouder, as if letting go of a layer made room for something new. The apprentice walks beside you, balancing a single sheet of bark like it's a delicate bowl of water. Sometimes, he says, a statue already exists inside the tree. We just borrow a little skin to let it out. You think of the peeled trunk again and realize you didn't witness a harvest. You witnessed a trade. Back in the village, the bark you carried is laid carefully on a raised platform made of woven reeds and flat stones. It's placed not just to dry, but to listen. That's how the woman describes it anyway. Before we shape it, she says, brushing a loose curl from her forehead, the bark hears everything. You glance around. Children giggle nearby. A rooster brags without context. Someone plays a rhythm on a gourd drum with the kind of confidence that only comes from not practicing. The bark rests in the middle of it all, soaking it up. You lean in, closer. No magic shimmer, no glowing glyphs. Just bark. And yet, something about it does feel aware, like a guest that hasn't introduced itself yet. That's when the elder from before joins you, carrying a small pot of warm oil infused with herbs. He dips his fingers into it, then touches the edge of one bark sheet. You know, he says, wood forgets, but bark forgives. You're not sure what that means, but you nod like it does. He leads you to a shaded corner of the village where statues, if you can call them that, stand quietly. Some are barely figures at all, just shapes, faces with no mouths, bodies made of wrapped bark and whispers, no dramatic poses, no heroic chests puffed out, just stillness and presence. He gestures to one. That one, he says, was made to honor a woman who taught silence. You blink. How do you teach silence? She never interrupted. Fair. You step closer. There's something undeniably soft about it. Not in structure. It stands firmly, but in intention, like it's not there to be seen so much as felt. This is when the elder explains the local belief that bark, especially when gathered gently, retains the voice of the tree, not the sound, but the tone, the way it breathed, the way it bent in storms, the way it existed when no one watched. So, when shaped into a statue, that voice remains. And if done properly, you can hear it, not through ears, but through fingers, through breath. You try it. One bark figure stands with arms folded across its chest, layered in alternating strips of dark and pale bark. You place your palm against it and feel warmth? No, not physical. Something quieter, like the feeling right before a thought arrives. The elder watches. He doesn't smile. He just says, some spirits want to be remembered. Others want to be understood. Historians, of course, argue endlessly about this. Some insist the voice of the bark is metaphor, that villagers projected emotion onto a material because it was soft, biodegradable, or culturally accessible. Others, especially those who visited, aren't so sure. One particularly poetic scholar wrote, "To dismiss bark as primitive is to assume stone is superior simply because it resists time. You run your fingers over another figure, this one more abstract. No eyes, just curves and wraps and bends like wind caught in cloth. It's not asking to be anything. It simply is. You sit beside it, listening not for sound, but for stillness. And as the sun shifts a little further west, casting the bark in new light, you wonder if some materials don't want to be preserved, just heard, Later that afternoon, you wander toward the edge of the village, where the air smells faintly of roasted maize and distant rain. There, beneath a woven canopy stretched between three trees, you see something unexpected. A statue with legs. Well, almost legs. They bend oddly, like knees mid-laugh, and the torso is stitched with palm fiber in a way that suggests it wasn't built to stand in one place. You're not alone. Two women are crouched nearby, adjusting straps and padding sewn into the back of the statue. One gestures for you to come closer. You oblige, carefully stepping over a basket of gourds filled with drying pigment. This one, she says, tightening a fiber cord, is for wearing. You blink. She laughs, not unkindly. It dances, and just like that, the word statue starts to feel a bit rigid. What you're looking at isn't just a carved representation of someone long gone. It's a costume, a body extension, a presence made mobile, layers of bark shaped not to be admired from a pedestal, but to move through crowds, sway with drums, and become part of the ritual. They lift it gently and begin fastening it to a wide-boned man wearing a linen wrap and the kind of expression that says, "I've done this before." When they're done, he adjusts the arm position slightly and steps into the open. Drums begin, slow and measured, like a heartbeat at rest. He moves in response, not theatrical, not performance, just movement, familiar, fluid, and strange in its gentleness. The bark figure becomes him, or he becomes it. The line is unclear, and intentionally so. People gather. No one claps, no one shouts. They simply sway in rhythm. A toddler toddles forward, touches the barked hand, then toddles away again, unafraid. You learn that these bark statues, if that word even still fits, were never made to be static. Many were created specifically for movement, to enter spaces, to leave them. Some were designed to be disassembled after one use, burned, buried, or fed to the river, and it makes sense somehow, because what better material than bark to represent things that live briefly, beautifully, and then transform? Historians still debate this, of course. Many early colonial observers dismissed bark figures as incomplete, lacking finish. They wrote, too soft to endure. Few realized they weren't meant to endure. They were meant to arrive. You watch as the man removes the statue from his body with the same reverence you might show to a beloved coat or an old friend. The bark creaks slightly as it's unfastened, and the women catch it mid-air before it can fall. They lay it on a mat. It doesn't look sad, just resting. You kneel beside it and run your hand along the shoulder, now slightly warm from being worn. There are faint creases there, movement lines, wrinkles of memory. The woman beside you says, "It will hold the dance until someone else needs it." You nod, not quite ready to stand up. It's a strange thing, you realize, to meet a statue that's still catching its breath. You wake the next morning to the sound of a mortar and pestle working rhythmically somewhere nearby. It's not loud, just consistent, like a heartbeat you forgot to notice until it filled the whole room. You follow the sound through narrow paths bordered by baskets of drying bark chips and shallow bowls of pigment. The scent changes as you move, sharper, almost sweet. like resin and smoke, got into a whispering contest. The pounding leads you to a shaded space where three women are gathered around a low stone table. Their movements are fluid, practiced. One grinds, one stirs, one fans smoke from a clay bowl that smells distinctly like burned pepper and old honey. You sit on a woven mat and wait. Eventually, one of the women, barefoot, gray-haired, calm as a horizon, turns to you and asks, "Do you want to know how it sticks?" You nod, though you're not entirely sure what's about to stick to what. She hands you a piece of bark, dry and slightly curled at the edge. "Without this," she says, "the figures fall apart." What she's referring to is not just a paste, it's family knowledge, a recipe passed from hand to hand, guarded mostly by grandmothers and one particularly secretive uncle. You lean over as they work. The base is tree sap, sticky, amber-colored, and warm. To this, they add fine ash from specific bark varieties, crushed termite clay, mashed banana skin for elasticity, and a touch of fermented palm wine. The scent is nostalgic. If you grew up inside an antique wooden bowl, one of the women hands you a strip of softened bark and a dollop of the paste. You're instructed to layer, press, and hold. Not force, just coax. It works. The bark clings like memory. You try another layer. This one doesn't stick as well. You're told it's too dry. You need bark that still listens. You wonder how many materials in your world were simply not listening anymore. They show you other things. How to seal the edge of a statue's jaw with fibers dipped in the mixture. How to shape eyelids by layering paste in a half-moon pattern. How, if you're not careful, too much banana will make the whole thing sag slightly in heat. And yes, this has happened during rituals. You laugh, so do they. Especially the eldest woman, who adds, "One year, a whole ancestor melted before the third drumbeat." You learn that this paste isn't just about adhesion, it's about intention. It binds not just bark to bark, but story to shape. Each batch is slightly different, dependent on the weather, the mood, the particular tree that gave its sap that day. Historians rarely talk about this part. They speak of composite adhesives in clinical terms. They don't mention how the paste smells different when stirred by someone in mourning, or how it becomes too thin when made on certain lunar phases. But the women here know. They don't test it by texture or time. They test it by touch. You spend the rest of the morning helping layer strips around a figure's shoulder. Not a statue this time, but a mask. One that will only be worn once, then burned. Not out of disrespect, but to return the form to where it came from. You ask if that feels like waste. One woman shrugs. Is bread wasted when it's eaten? You have no answer. Only warmth in your hands, and paste under your fingernails, and a slow, certain understanding that sometimes the things that don't last are the ones we remember most clearly. By late afternoon, the village begins to shift. There's a quiet energy now, like the space is holding its breath. People walk with intention, carrying baskets, cloths, bundles of dried herbs. The apprentice from earlier waves you over this time with his arms full of folded fabric and two small carved stools balanced expertly on his head. "It's festival day," he says, matter of fact, as though that explains why someone just walked by holding a gourd painted entirely in stripes. You follow him toward the central clearing, which has transformed in ways you didn't expect. Low altars have been dressed in deep indigo cloths, palm leaves rustle overhead, and in the middle of it all, a path has been cleared, lined with flat stones, small offerings, and woven fans that someone will definitely forget to collect later. At the edge of the space lies a gathering of bark figures, not standing, not displayed, carried. Each one rests on a wooden plank hoisted by 4 people, hands wrapped in cloth to avoid direct touch. The statues vary in size, shape, and intention. Some are wrapped in pale bark, others dark, some painted with faint swirls or dots. All of them are watching, or rather, you get the feeling they're being watched through. A hush falls. A woman steps forward, draped in saffron and ochre, her face marked with a single white line from forehead to chin. She sings, soft at first, a hum that curls like smoke. Then, from somewhere unseen, drums join her, steady, low, like a heart remembering itself. And the figures begin to move. Not on their own, of course not, but as each one is carried along the cleared path, there's no doubt they are the center of this. Not idols, not decorations, guests of honor. You walk beside one plank, observing the bark figure atop it. It's smaller than the others, genderless. Its limbs are curled inward, like it's listening. It has no eyes, just smooth bark where a face might be. That one, the apprentice whispers, was made for a child who never spoke. You don't ask more. You just walk quietly. Along the path, people stop to bow slightly. Some offer a handful of herbs, others just smile. There's no frenzy, no fireworks, just presence. This is not a celebration of what bark became. It's a conversation with what it carried. Historians often misunderstood these events. Early accounts describe puppet processions or ritual pageants, but they missed the essence. This wasn't performance. It was witnessing. The figures reach the center of the grove and are placed gently on small raised platforms, each surrounded by offerings, gourds, cloth, pebbles, carved tokens, not for grandeur, for familiarity. You sit at the edge, feet tucked beneath you, watching as a woman approaches a bark statue and begins to hum. She touches its forehead with her palm and closes her eyes. Later, you ask the apprentice what that meant. She's reminding it, he says, what it meant to be held. You feel something tighten in your chest. It's not sadness, it's reverence. And maybe a little disbelief that bark, so often discarded and forgotten in other places, could be made into something this seen. As the sun dips below the canopy and the shadows grow longer, the figures remain where they were placed, still watching, still being watched. You turn back one last time before leaving the clearing. The wind rustles, and a bark figure shifts ever so slightly in the breeze. Not enough to startle, just enough to say, "I'm still here." You wake the next morning with the memory of drums still echoing faintly in your bones. The village is quieter now, not solemn, just settling. like the earth is exhaling after being held for a very long time. You wander toward the shade of a tamarind tree, where a group of elders sits in a half circle, passing a clay cup between them. You're invited in with a nod, and the apprentice, now chewing lazily on a piece of sugar cane, slides over to make room. Today's discussion: durability. One elder taps a bark figure beside him. It's old, older than it looks. The color faded, edges softened, cracks filled in with ash and time. You're told it was made before anyone here was born. Still here, he says, knocking it lightly again. Sort of. He leans closer, eyes narrowing, but not what it was. You ask what he means. The spirit's gone, he replies. Moved on. This is just what's left. Another elder disagrees, gently. Maybe it stays as long as someone remembers. They all pause at that. You sip from the cup. It tastes like tamarind and ginger, and maybe a hint of charcoal, possibly regret. Hard to say. They begin telling stories, statues that lasted generations, others that crumbled in months, one that dissolved completely during a monsoon, because the spirit didn't like being indoors, someone says. To knowing nods, you learn that some bark figures are built to endure, layered with oils, resins, and cloth wrappings, but others are made deliberately fragile. Some memories, an elder explains, aren't meant to linger. They serve their season, then they leave. You run your fingers along a nearby figure's surface. The bark has curled at the edges, like it's trying to peel itself back into the forest. Historians have always struggled with this. Durability is how they measure importance. What survives, they study. What decays, they forget. But here, what fades is often what mattered most. You were shown a small bark figure that's cracked straight through the center. It's been repaired, tied back together with thin vine and sealed with clay. It looks like it's been held together by intent. The woman who brings it out says nothing. She just places it down beside you and waits. You ask if it still works. She shrugs. That depends what you mean by work. You ask how long it's lasted. Long enough. The afternoon stretches on. You help patch another figure, pressing paste into a flaked shoulder, wrapping new bark gently over an arm that's softened with age. There's no rush, no sense of fixing. Just a quiet kind of companionship. You start to realize something. These statues were never meant to last forever, but they weren't meant to vanish either. They exist in between, long enough to hold the story, short enough to return to the earth. You sit a while longer, and as the breeze picks up, rustling through the trees like fingers across a drum, the bark figure beside you lets out a soft creak. Not a cry, not a warning, just a reminder it's still here, for now, and sometimes for now is enough. You're invited into a courtyard hidden behind thick walls of woven reed and low clay, the entrance marked only by a piece of bark tied with a single white thread. The apprentice doesn't follow this time. He just gestures toward the doorway and says, "Only women shape bark in here." Inside, the air is different, cooler, heavier, like water that remembers it once belonged to a well. You're greeted by silence, then movement. A group of women is seated in a wide circle. No one is speaking, but every hand is busy. Bark pieces are stacked in neat piles, pigments arranged in gourd bowls, and woven baskets brim with string, dried flowers, and beads made from bone and shell. One woman gestures for you to sit. You do. Then she places a bark figure in your lap. It's small, delicate, the shape of a face, but not a mask. No eyes, just soft contours where a nose and mouth might be imagined. You're told it's for someone's grandmother. Not a grandmother, theirs. Everyone in this courtyard is shaping someone they remember. The figures are personal, protective, and in many cases, meant to be hidden. One woman threads bark strips through a frame to create a womb-like shape. Another paints dots along a curve. Each dot a lullaby, she says, remembered from childhood. You notice there are no men's names spoken here. No hero figures. No declarations. Just memory, textile, touch. Historians often gloss over this. Bark statuary, when documented, tends to be reduced to ceremonial roles, masculine lineages, or broad cultural functions. But this is not a function. It's a folding. You're shown how to press warm bark around a curved gourd to make a shoulder, how to soften it with breath before wrapping it around a hollow. One woman sings as she shapes hers, the melody slow and strange, like a story with no nouns. You ask what it means. She's not singing to us, someone says. She's reminding the bark what it used to be. You help gather strips and hand them to the older women. They don't thank you out loud. They don't need to. There's something in their hands, their nods, their precise movements that tells you you've been folded into the rhythm. The figure in your lap is now wrapped in thin cords of palm fiber. A woman adds a flower to its chest. For sweetness, she says. You wonder how long it will last. But before you can ask, she adds, longer if you keep it in your breath. There's a quiet laugh across the circle. Even the serious ones smile. You realize, sitting there with bark in your lap and silence in your hands, that this place isn't just a courtyard. It's an archive of moments that didn't make it into history books, of women who didn't need to be remembered, just understood. You close your eyes for a moment, the scent of bark and crushed leaves all around you, and in that moment, the figure in your lap feels less like a statue and more like a whisper. Later that day, you find yourself seated beneath a canopy of hanging vines beside an elder named Mako, who chews slowly on roasted kola nut while watching a single piece of bark twist in the wind. He doesn't speak for a long time. You get the sense he's been waiting for the bark to finish a thought. When he does speak, it's with the kind of voice that makes you sit up straighter, even though he's barely above a whisper. Do you know, he begins, that bark remembers more than shape? You shake your head. He nods. It remembers heat, pressure, the hands that held it, and even the ones that didn't. You glance at the bark figure in front of you, another one made for movement, but now resting. Its bark seems to shimmer slightly in the light, not because of magic, but because the layers have caught oil, sun, and touch in uneven patches. It looks lived in. Mako picks up a small bowl and offers you a sip. The drink is herbal, bitter, slightly smoky. He says it's made with bark from a tree that once saw too much rain. You ask how he knows that. The taste, he says. You pause. Wait, laugh a little. He doesn't. He's serious. So you sip again. And, if you're honest, it does taste like rain that overstayed its welcome. You spend the rest of the afternoon with Mako, learning the subtleties of what bark absorbs, how some strips hold scent longer than others, how the curve of a bark figure's back can reflect the wind on the day it was harvested. He shows you a small figure carved for a healer. The arms are longer than usual. The feet are curved inward. She walked like that, he says, fast, like storms. You touch the back of the figure and feel an indentation. That's where she leaned against the same tree every morning, he adds. We used bark from that tree. It's almost too poetic to be true. But here, poetry and practicality are never far apart. He walks you to a line of bark strips, drying on a rack. Some are smooth, others are riddled with tiny scars, insect marks, or faint burns. This one, he says, pointing to a dark, slightly bowed piece, was held by a woman who wept while carrying it. You raise your eyebrows. How do you know that? She told me, he says, tapping his chest. You smile, but your hand hovers over the same strip. It's warmer than the others. Historians have no framework for this. They catalog materials, sources, uses. They list bark under organic, sometimes under ceremonial. They don't write about grief-stained fiber or wind-worn edges or bark that won't take paint because it was made to remain plain. But Mako and the others, they know. They don't argue about what bark is. They listen to what it's been. As the sun dips, he hands you a strip, tells you to hold it while you walk back. Let it hear where you go. You laugh again, but you do it, and you realize something. Maybe memory isn't just something we carry. Maybe it's something that carries us too. You wake early, again, this time to the sound of voices, not in conversation, but in rhythm. Not song exactly, more like shared breath. You follow the sound through soft mist, still clinging to the leaves, and find yourself standing near the old meeting tree where the elders have gathered. But today, they are not carving, they are remembering. Laid out before them are several bark figures, aged and worn. Some are barely more than bundles now. Bark long, since softened and pulled inward like sleeping bodies. Others have held their shape. Arms folded, heads bowed, bark edges darkened with oil and time. They are being prepared for return. One woman, kneeling beside a figure wrapped in blue-dyed cloth, touches its forehead and murmurs a name you don't recognize. Her hands move gently, not cleaning, but honoring. These will go back, someone says beside you. Back where? To the wind. You've heard of burials, of river send-offs, of ceremonial burnings. But this is different. You're told that some figures, once their work is done, are not destroyed, but given back to the air. They're not waste, a man says. They're weight made light again. He smiles. Like a sigh you've held too long, you help carry the figures, wrapped now in bark cloth and tied with twine, toward the edge of the forest. There, a low hill rises. The wind gathers. Not wild, not dramatic, just present. One by one, the figures are laid gently into shallow cradles woven from reeds and bark. A circle forms. No drums, no speeches, just a pause. Then the wind lifts, slowly, steadily, and the cloth rustles. The bark sighs, and the figures begin to soften, collapse inward. The air takes the lightest pieces, curls of bark, stray fibers, and scatters them like memories on the move. No one cries, because this isn't an ending, it's release. You sit with the apprentice as the sun rises higher. He's holding one last figure, smaller than the rest, shaped like a spiral. What about this one? You ask. He shrugs. Not ready yet. He places it in a basket. Later, maybe. Historians who've heard of this practice rarely agree on its meaning. Some call it symbolic evaporation. Others insist it's metaphor. But most don't mention it at all. Because how do you archive something that's supposed to leave? You look back at the hill. The figures are gone now, but the air feels full, not heavy, held. You walk back slowly, the apprentice beside you, still carrying that last spiral figure like a question with no answer yet. You realize something as you go. The point wasn't to make something forever. It was to make something true, then let it go. The village is quieter now, not in mourning, but in digestion. You feel it in the way people move, in the way the trees lean a little more into the wind, in the way that final spiral-shaped bark figure rests, unclaimed, in the apprentice's arms as he follows you back through the foot-worn path toward the carving space. Today, something is different. You're introduced to a man named Kowe. He doesn't live in the village. Not exactly. He comes and goes. An artist, they say, though he doesn't use the word. He calls himself someone who reminds things what they can become. Kowe works with bark too, but differently. You enter his workspace, an open-air pavilion of suspended mats and low stools. Bark hangs like scrolls from twine-strung rafters. It's dappled with pigment, sunset reds, storm sky grays, the green of things that have just begun to sprout. His bark figures are strange. Some are traditional, layered, quiet, grounded. Others are bold, warped, sculpted with bark, boiled, curled, even burned. One stands on 3 legs. Another has no face, but 12 arms, each one reaching in a different direction. You ask him, are these still statues? He considers. Maybe they're just questions, he says. You touch one, a flat piece with a circular hole through the chest. It's soft at the edges, brittle at the center. It feels like grief. Somehow, new bark, he explains, doesn't like old shapes. He shows you how he works, soaking the bark in tea made from roots and ashes, flattening it under smooth stones, painting not with brushes, but with braided twigs. You ask him why he doesn't use wood. Because bark, he says, forgives. He pauses, and because it forgets too. His figures are not made for rituals, not for wind, not for processions. They're for memory that doesn't know where to go. You help him shape a new one. You wrap, layer, twist. Add a faint line of pigment. No symmetry, no narrative, just instinct. When it's done, he sets it in the center of his pavilion. It'll speak tomorrow, he says. Maybe it will. Historians rarely record the work of artists like Kowe. Too recent, too experimental, too quiet. But here, people visit his pavilion to sit, to touch, to remember. You return the next morning and find your piece still there, only slightly changed. Edges curled in the night, color softened. Koei nods toward it. It listened to you. You smile, unsure if that's good. Later, you ask what he'll do with it. Leave it. He points toward the edge of the grove, where older figures rest half covered in moss, like stories letting themselves fade. Some bark, he says, just wants to be touched once, then forgotten. You walk through his archive. Twisted bark faces, bent limbs, spirals and symbols, and realize that this too is part of the tradition. Not preservation, but permission to let something exist, and then step aside. The afternoon stretches, golden and slow, as you follow Kawe to the edge of the village, where the forest reclaims space more quickly. The paths are thinner here, overgrown in places, and the light dances like it's unsure whether it wants to stay. He walks in silence, the final spiral-shaped bark figure tucked carefully in his arms, the same one the apprentice carried, the same one that was never offered to the wind. You're not sure where you're going, only that it feels right to go there without asking. Eventually, you arrive at a small clearing, quiet, unceremonious, just a patch of moss beneath a leaning tree, and a smooth stone, marked with tiny cuts. Names, maybe, or symbols, or simply texture, for texture's sake. Koei sets the figure down. He doesn't place it high, doesn't display it. He kneels, cradles it, like a bowl of fire he isn't afraid of. You sit nearby, watching. The wind doesn't rise. No birds call. Even the trees seem to soften their breath. This one, he finally says, was for the wind, but it wasn't ready. You wait, he continues slowly. Some things need to be held before they can be released. Not shown, not used, just held. He begins to wrap the figure in bark cloth, not tightly, just enough to let it feel covered. Then he places it gently beside the stone, where vines are already starting to curl toward the edges. There is no chant, no farewell, only a phrase whispered like steam from a cup. May you be forgotten beautifully. You ask if that's a blessing or a curse. He smiles. It depends who's doing the forgetting. The two of you sit quietly, long after the figure is placed, long enough for the light to shift, long enough for a butterfly to land on the spiral and lift off again, as if checking in. You understand now that bark figures were never made just for ritual or story. They were made for weight, not the kind that burdens, the kind that grounds. And when the time is right, they return that weight to the world, not as legacy, not as message, but as texture. Historians will never find this one. It won't survive wind or rain or time, but it doesn't need to, because you were here. You saw it, let go, and now you carry the shape of that, letting in your chest, not heavy, just there, waiting for the right breeze to lift it. Your final morning in the village arrives not with fanfare, but with mist. It moves slowly through the trees like a visitor that knows it's early and doesn't want to wake anyone. You pack lightly, not because you're in a hurry to leave, but because somehow the weight you arrived with has changed. Softened, before you go, you're invited to return to the grove one last time. Not the carving space, not the courtyard, but the original clearing, the quiet one, where the first bark statue watched you from the shadows of the firelight. It's almost empty now, just the trees, the worn path of footprints from countless ceremonies, and a single bark figure sitting beneath the fig tree. You recognize it, not because it's marked, but because of the feeling it gives off, the same presence that moved through the processions, the workshops, the whispers, the same feeling that hovered in the dance and rested in the courtyard, a shape that softened, folded, and stayed. You kneel beside it. Its edges are curling, its color faded, but it hasn't collapsed. Not yet. You reach out, slowly, and place your hand gently against its side. There's no magic, no hidden message, just warmth and silence. Then, quietly, Ario, the apprentice, sits beside you. He doesn't speak for a while, just watches the bark figure, like an old friend might watch a photograph. I used to think, he says, that we made these to keep memories. He pauses. But maybe we make them to let memories leave safely. You stay there a long time, watching the breeze move across the clearing, watching the bark shift, just slightly, with the breath of the trees. Ario points to the sky. Look, a single piece of bark, thin as paper, lifts into the air, caught by nothing in particular, moved by nothing dramatic, just rising, curling, spinning, then falling out of sight. Sometimes, he says, statue waits for someone to see it before it lets go. You don't ask if that's what just happened. You just feel it, and in that feeling, the bark becomes something else entirely. Not sculpture, not figure, but moment. You stand slowly, brush dirt from your knees, and leave the clearing the way you entered it, quietly, gently, and with a new understanding of softness, not as fragility, but as choice. Now, wherever you are, whether curled beneath blankets or sitting with your breath slowed, let this part of the story settle in you, not loud, not urgent, just like bark, soft, layered, listening. Let your shoulders loosen, let your hands unclench, let your thoughts drift like leaves across a still forest floor. You've seen things in this story that don't demand attention, but offer invitation. Figures made not to last, but to carry feeling. Work done not for permanence, but for peace. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Picture that spiral figure resting beneath the vines. Picture the old bark statue beneath the fig tree. Picture the wind, not rushing, not howling, just moving, the way sleep sometimes finds you when you stop asking it to. The earth doesn't need your effort right now, only your presence. The stories you've heard tonight don't need to be memorized. They've already left their shape inside you. You carry them now, not like a burden, but like breath. Let the last words fade into your rhythm. Let the last image soften into shadow, and let sleep take root gently, like bark finding its way back to earth. You're held. You're safe. You can rest now.